Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, AFO conference, and welcome to the Vision 2025 session on the topic of environmental sustainability. And as Steve says, today we're focused on counting what matters, a topic we chose to highlight the importance of measuring our impacts, an essential step in taking meaningful action. My name is Chris Johnson, co-founder of Shambhala Festival, an AFO member, and chair of Vision 2025. And before I introduce the speakers for today's session, I want to take the opportunity to tell you a little about Vision 2025 for those of you that are new to us. Vision 2025 is an initiative of the Outdoor Events Industry Environmental Steering Group, aka Vision 2025, made up of industry associations such as the AFO, the Association of Independent Festivals, AAF, NOAA, the Production Services Association, and promoters such as Live Nation and Shambhala Festival, and brought together by Julie's Bicycle, who host the initiative. Also a special thanks to the EIF, acronym City I know, it's the Events Industry Forum, who part fund Vision 2025. The group grew from Powerful Thinking, which was a project started 10 years ago, which was focused on energy at events. We've been meeting as a steering group for 10 years, providing direction and creating resources to support organisers to take environmental action. The Vision 2025 Knowledge Hub is a website which has an absolute stack of guides, case studies, news, and news suppliers database. So please have a look. There's a wealth of information there that's free to access for the industry. And it's a large part of what we've been doing as a group together. In 2020, we published the second edition of the Show Must Go On report, a guide to how organisers can take steps to reduce impacts and a roadmap for our industry. And out of this report, the first edition of the report in 2015, came the Vision 2025, which in a nutshell is a campaign to cut greenhouse gas emissions by events by half by 2025, something which we know is possible from industry experience and research. So far, over 100 UK festivals have made the pledge, and if you haven't already joined, please check out the Vision 2025 website and take the pledge. Use the free resources to take your first steps. And now on to our speakers, all leaders and experts in the industry on environmental practice. I'm really grateful for their time given freely to share their insights with us. And you'll be hearing from Chiara Badiali, who is the Sector Intelligence Lead at Julie's Bicycle. And she will provide us with some context on why we need to measure our impacts in the first place and the wider picture. We'll then have Mary Corfield, true pioneer and AFO member, who will share ways that Greenbelt Festival have tackled waste management more sustainably without huge costs. Next up, Abi Edgar from sustainable travel charity Ecolibrium, focusing on ways event organisers can promote smarter travel, reducing emissions. And finally, Tim Benson, chair of Powerful Thinking, and also from Smart Power to tackle how to manage power with few emissions. So soak up the insights and please join us and all the panelists after their presentations for our live Q&A. And remember that you can use the chat box for questions and also vote for questions. Thank you for being with us, and over to Chiara.
Hi everyone, and thanks for having me along. My name is Chiara and I work at Julie's Bicycle. We are the charity that has been supporting the arts and music industry to take action on climate change for over 10 years now. In those 10 years, things have generally not been going in the right direction. Global temperature is now hotter than it has been in the entire history of human civilization. We are in uncharted territory. And even though countries are making new climate commitments every day, they're not yet reflected in what's being done day to day in the way that we live and work. And we are on track to more than 2 degrees of warming this century, maybe as much as 4. So most of us haven't really connected with what 2 degrees means in terms of people's loss of lives, livelihoods, and homes. You can more or less take every crisis that we already have today and multiply it. And that climate change and those crises, they happen in fractions of degrees, and every fraction of a degree matters. And that means that everything we do matters. Temperatures keep going up as long as we keep putting greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. So the decisions that we make now are going to set the course for the next millennium on this planet. Whether we like it or not, that is on us now. We have to at least halve global emissions every decade between now and 2050. Some say we in the UK have much more responsibility than that because we've benefited more from past emissions. The UK is responsible for 5% of all the greenhouse gas emissions that have ever been put into the atmosphere, and that's nearly as much as all of Africa and Latin America put together. If you're running a UK event and watching this, you've benefited from that history. And that level and speed of emissions reductions that we're facing now isn't really just an environmental target. It's a full transformation and paradigm shift as to how our society and our economy works. That includes how we run our festivals and our events. And we can either start on that journey or in a few years' time find that we don't have a plan for the new rules and laws and targets that are being brought in by governments and local authorities, trying to meet the commitments that we've already made. So what does that look like? One, it looks like having a credible plan for reducing the emissions from how we run events and festivals. Two, the Committee on Climate Change, which is the body that advises the UK government on these issues, estimates that around 2/3 of the emissions reductions that we need are going to include some form of behaviour change. And that's a huge opportunity to role model those shifts in our spaces and change people's behaviours in the priority areas of how we travel and what we eat, especially. And three, it's really looking out there. So working with our audiences, with our communities to create and to push political will and more ambitious change through campaigns, through fundraising, working in partnership with our local area and with local governments, and also with others who align with those values elsewhere in the world. So on that first step, what do we measure and why do we measure? It's a bit of a cliched phrase, but you can't manage what you don't measure, or you only manage what you measure, gets said a lot. The depth to which you get into these areas is going to depend on how big of an event you are, but keeping track of at least some of your impacts and having a plan for reducing them is pretty much basic housekeeping in this day and age. So when it comes to power, where we actually have to get to is we have to use less energy overall, and we have to get to zero carbon outdoor event power in the next couple of decades. And that's going to mean more grid connections, batteries, maybe some hydrogen power. So that's a transformation that is coming. We will not be using diesel in a few decades' time. And biofuel and HVO, they're kind of transition fuels really on the way to electricity. But what do we count? Really, it's your overall fuel use in litres, kilowatt hours, if you have an electricity connection. And of course, if you want to get into the depths of energy efficiency and really make changes through better planning and on-site monitoring, then there's lots more that you can do, which I'm sure Tim will talk about. We do have so much knowledge on better energy management now and how you can reduce that fuel use on the Powerful Thinking website. On travel and transport, by 2050, all surface transport, so how we travel on roads, by trains, also has to be zero carbon. And that means, again, it has to be powered by electricity, maybe hydrogen. What does that mean for us in events world? We have to reduce how many miles people are driving overall. And also aviation growth has to be constrained or even reverse, meaning we have to fly less. And so that's a really big deal because travel and transport are the biggest source of carbon emissions for events, how people are getting to you. And there is a tendency to leave it for later when you're looking at your environmental impacts because it feels difficult. But if you want to make a big difference, you have to focus on this area. In practice, that means giving people incentives to travel by public transport or by coaches, and disincentives to travel alone by car. If you're choosing a site, it means choosing one that's well connected by public transport. It means looking at shifts in how we think about how we share the travel impacts of booking artists with other promoters and focusing on local suppliers. In terms of what to count, start with audience travel. The better you understand where people are traveling from and how they're getting to your event, the more targeted you can make your plans as to how to get them out of cars and traveling differently. And you can do that through audience travel surveys, even adding questions to surveys you're doing anyway. And you can use other indicators like the number of car parking passes that you've sold or coach tickets sold. Again, what's going to work for you is going to depend a little bit on the kind of event you are, but you are going to have a traffic management plan, and adding environmental issues into that is a really good start. In in terms of food, we have to shift to more plant-based diets to meet our climate targets, both because of emissions that come directly from, from cows, basically, and other livestock, and how we manage the soil, but also because we have to free up more land to grow all the trees that we need to plant and restore habitats. And we also, as part of that, have to reduce food waste. And that means we can also do better at the kind of food that we serve at bars and concessions, in terms of, how it's been grown, whether it's organic, whether it's seasonal. And the other really big opportunity here is helping to drive wider societal shifts through what we offer to audiences when they come to our events. So a key and relatively easy thing to begin to count might be the percentage of vegan and vegetarian menu items on offer across your site, to make sure that you have really good options there that are helping to nudge people into trying out eating less meat and dairy. Some events have done more detailed carbon footprint work with specialist partners, and that is something that you can look at if it's of interest to you. In terms of waste and materials, we have to use a lot less stuff overall, and recycling rates need to go up to probably about 70% by 2030. And also we have to send no more biodegradable waste, so things like food waste, things like timber, to landfill by 2025 at the latest. That means more reuse, it means better material separation on site, it means thinking through what you buy so it matches where it can go after the event, and it means really following through on those zero waste to landfill commitments. In terms of information and counting, you can start just by working with your waste contractor to get figures of how much waste you're sending to different places. It's not an exact science, and there is a point at which you actually have to start following the paper trail in more detail, but it is a start. And again, you can get into a lot more detail. I'm sure Mary's going to speak about the brilliant work that they've been doing at Greenbelt. And lastly, what counts is money as well. So let's leave our money and move it out of fossil fuels where we can. So that means looking at moving your pensions and investing in or fundraising for climate projects. I don't have to tell you how to count money. So with those figures of, for example, the liters of diesels you've used, the tons of waste and where they're going, you can use the free Judy's Bicycle Creative Green Carbon calculators. They are free to use. You can create an account so that you can actually track and compare your impacts over time. There's a tool for outdoor events. Again, most of the data entry fields are customized so that they're most relevant to the kind of data that you want to be collecting as an event. So what can be useful is if you create an account and log in and have a look before your event and make a list of some of the information that you want to gather and start planning how you're going to do that. There is also a tool for offices so that you can track the impacts, for example, from your business travel. And if you want to, you can expand it to tours, and there's also one for venues as well. And that data that you submit on the tools actually helps us then create collective benchmarks for the benefit of everyone that we can use in things like the Vision 2025 Show Must Go On report. And that means, there's learning that gets created for the benefit of the whole community, and we have evidence that can support action and advocacy when we are speaking to government departments, to funders, to other people out there. And lastly, if you want a more detailed kind of paid for analysis for your event, you can contact us, and there's also loads and loads of other people who are providing really great services and support in the industry. In the end, it comes down to the question that you really ask yourself. So this isn't just about reducing environmental impact. It's about putting some action behind the idea that music and festivals are a force for good in our communities, and the climate crisis demands nothing less of us. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Corfield from Greenbelt Festival, and I'm here today to talk to you about monitoring and measuring your waste. Now, before I move into the practicalities around that, I wanted to talk to you first about actually what ends up in your waste stream, because ultimately the best and most effective way to manage your waste is not to create it in the first place. So think about what's coming onto your site, think about where it's going after you've used it once. Can you keep it? Can you use it the second year? Can you sell it to somebody else? Can you rent it in the first place so you don't have to dispose of it at the end because it's going to be reused? Can you repurpose it? Can you recycle it? Can you donate it? So as an example, some of the furnishings that we often use in our volunteer areas, we purchase them from a local charity shop, we use them for a few days, we donate them back to the local charity shop. Or carpets that have been damaged and aren't going to be reusable. Maybe there's an allotment society that would love the things out of the bottom of your tents because they can use them to suppress weeds when they're turning around their allotment plots. So think creatively about how you can stop things entering into your waste stream. But ultimately there will be things that are waste. So the next few minutes is going to be talking about what you can do to think about that and how you can approach it. Now, I realise some of you are probably more ahead than others in what you're doing with your waste and how much of your waste is recycled versus how much ends up in landfill or incineration. So bear with me if you know a little more, and hopefully there'll be something at least vaguely useful in these next 5 minutes for you. If you're not already aware, every year when you do your event, your waste contractor will provide you with a waste transfer note. That tells you where your waste has ended up and it tells you how much there is by category. It might tell you, for instance, that your local recycling centre has received 3 tonnes of glass and 2 tonnes of paper and card. It might tell you that your local landfill site or incineration site has received 8 tonnes of general waste. Find your waste transfer notes that you have a legal duty to keep and look at them. And look at them for 2 or 3 years and see if you can spot any patterns, anything that's changed, types of waste that's gone up or down, and think if you can work out any reasons why that might be the case. Once you've done that, talk to your waste contractor. This is really, really important and key to everything you do around your waste management. And whilst it's great to talk to the guy in the office that does your quote, and you do need them on side, actually who you really need to talk to is the person that manages the crew on your site. So they see what's coming in and out of your bins every day during your event. They know the areas of site where the bins have to be emptied far more than others. They know the types of waste that's coming out of those bins. They'll be able to tell you where the most glass comes from or where the most cans come from. And that information is really, really useful as you consider what you're going to target first. So, in an ideal world, none of us would be sending anything to landfill or incineration. Everything would be going for recycling or composting or repurposing. But you're probably not going to get there in a year. In fact, I think it's probably almost completely impossible to do that in one festival cycle. So pick a couple of things that you can focus on that you maybe have already measured so you know what you had the year before. So it could be a particular type of waste like plastic bottles or plastic in tons. And then think about what you can do and what you can change to measure that and how you can alter what you're doing. So plastic is a category that at Greenbelt we tackled several years ago. We knew that most plastic that goes into the waste and recycling system in the UK doesn't get recycled because there isn't enough demand for it. And so the majority of it ends up being either landfilled or burnt, and that wasn't something that we were happy with. So we wanted to stop all the caterers on our site selling plastic bottles or plastic anything really. And so we talked to them, we explained to them that this was going to be our situation. We talked to our audience and explained what we were doing and why, and then we implemented the changes. And as we measured it and we looked at the weight of plastic that we had at the end of that year's festival, it was about 80% less than the amount of plastic we'd had at the previous year, which was brilliant. We were thrilled, and we told our audience members and said, thank you so much for working with us. Look at what you've done. You've saved all these tons of plastic from going to landfill or being burnt. And they were excited too. They were on board with what we were doing. They wanted to know what changes we were going to make next. Take people with you. Celebrate the changes. Celebrate when things have worked. Thank your traders and your caterers when they've come on the journey with you, even if it made them grumpy in the first place. Be nice, be kind, be happy, be encouraging. So we decided to look at what was making up the majority of our black bins. So for us at Greenbelt, the black bins are general waste, things that aren't going into normal recycling streams. So things that are ending up at landfill or incineration. And it was very quickly obvious that the majority of what was going into those bins from our festival goers was effectively what came out of the food vans. So it was their noodle carton with a few noodles in the bottom of it. It was their fish and chip tray, it was their crepe carton with their cutlery in it, or their chopsticks from the noodle bar. That's what was going into the black wastes mostly. So the most effective way for us to target that was to enable those things to be compostable. And we were really lucky because we knew that we had a composting facility not too far from us, a commercial composting facility. So we talked with them, we worked out what they would be prepared to accept. We found the right kinds of packaging that would be happy, that make them happy. And then we talked to our caterers and traders and said, this is what we need you to use. Here are the brands, here are the products. Any of these will be fine, but we will be checking, and this is a condition of trading with us. And that's another reason why it's really, really important to talk with your waste contractors, because they know what's out there. They know the recycling plants that are near you. They know the composting plants that are near you. They can help you have those conversations and work out whether there are things you can send to places, or whether you're going to make a change and then discover that nobody wants the particular type of waste that you've created. Now, it's really important when you're talking to your audience that you do things in a really, really simple way, because behaviour change is something that humans generally avoid, and they're much more likely to make changes if you've made things as easy for them as is humanly possible. Big signs, colour-coded, but just make things simple. So when they go to the bin, it's glaringly obvious, it's colour-coded, it has a sign, it says food waste in huge letters across the top of it, or glass bottles or tin cans, or whatever that particular bin type might be. Make it really, really simple. Have lots of bins that people can easily get to, and make sure you have all of your different types of bins everywhere that you have bins. Because if you only put, for instance, your food waste bin in half of your bin sets, if someone goes to a bin set without a food waste bin, they'll probably just chuck it in something else. Which leads me on to bin toppers. You might think that a bin is a bin, and to an extent that's true, but to an extent it's not. So if, as you have something, you're rushing a new gig starting one of the other stages, you want to just dump your waste and get across there as quickly as possible, and the bins near you all are completely open topped, you're going to chuck it. And if it lands in the wrong category, you might not even notice. And if you do notice, you're probably not going to stick your hand in it to pull it out and put it in the other one. So if you put tops on the bins with small holes in them, people have to go right up to the bins in order to put their waste in. By going right up to the bins, the colours are right in front of them, the labels on the toppers are right in front of them. They're much more likely to take that extra half a second and put the piece of waste into the right coloured coded bin with the right label on it, because they can see what they're doing. Now, back of house waste often doesn't get given anywhere near as much time and thought as front of house waste, but can be a really sizable amount of the waste that you're generating. So really do give that some thought and some consideration. Front of house, you maybe have 5 different types of bins for your festival goers, all colour coded. Back of house, maybe your caterers have got 2? A recycling bin and a non-recycling bin. Are there any signs on them? Do they know what can go into each? Have you talked to them to find out what kind of waste they mostly produce? All these things are really important if you want to significantly decrease the amount of waste that you're generating and up the amount of recyclable items that you're taking out and sending off to be repurposed. So work again with your waste contractors, talk with your suppliers, talk with your catering companies, talk with your chip bands, talk with your t-shirt sellers, whoever they are, find out what it is they mostly produce and make sure you put the right kinds of bins at the back of their units so that it's easy for them when they're really busy, when they've got large queues and they need to take the waste out to get it out of the way, that they can really quickly and simply put it in the right kind of bin. And if you have skips, make sure your skips are only in the area where your waste contractors are working. Make sure that therefore, if someone tries to dump a load of pallets out of the back of their van or whatever it might be into your skips, they're going to spot them and say, hey, whoa, what's going on? What are you doing with that? It might be something recyclable that they can say, actually, just put it over there and we'll deal with it. Might be something that they say, oh, what's the story here? Are you giving us your whole season's waste that you've been carting around and you've got fed up with? If you don't have the right people in the right places, you're not going to be able to measure what's going on, and you're not going to be able to put in measures to change it and to reduce it. Ultimately, if you do this well, you can save yourself money. The less you send to landfill, the less you pay. The less you send to incineration, the less you pay. The more you create that's recyclable or reusable or repurposable, the less you're paying to buy new to replace it as well. But basically, it all comes down to this: measure things, change them, measure them, learn, repeat, measure, learn, repeat, measure, learn, repeat, etc. Change and measure and change and measure. And take everybody with you as much as you can.
Hi, and thank you to the AFO and Vision 2025 for inviting me to take part in this event. My name's Abi Moores and I'm the project manager for Ecolibrium. Ecolibrium is a UK charity that started out in 2015 as Energy Revolution. We were set up by a number of festival directors looking to tackle the issue of travel emissions in the festival sector. But why was it travel that they needed to set up a project to address? So moving on to my first slide, what you've got there is a diagram showing the average festival carbon footprint. What it shows is that typically 80% of the festival's carbon footprint comes from audience travel. Therefore, if you're serious about tackling your carbon emissions, then you've got to be looking at travel. Hence, the directors set up the project to do just that. Since our inception, we've worked with over 55 festival and supplier members to balance over 13 million festival travel miles. We're able to support you with measuring your travel impacts, looking at how you can reduce those travel impacts, changes that you can implement to do that, and how you can then go on to account for unavoidable emissions by carbon balancing them with our carbon balancing programs that Ecolibrium provides. So as festival organisers, you're in a unique position to be able to inspire both your audiences, but also all the other people that you work with, your peers, other events and other industries as well. And we've got a real opportunity to lead the way when it comes to audience travel to events. What I'm going to show you in this presentation is ways that you can measure the emissions and what you can do about those emissions. And what I hope is that it will help you to take this moment to plan how you can build back better and greener and really implement or input these travel action plans into your planning. So moving on to my next slide, the first thing that we need to talk about is measuring audience travel. So we're looking at this big portion of carbon emissions that are responsible at your event. And what we want to understand is how you can measure those travel emissions and measure that travel data. So first of all, you can be looking at your ticketing. So look at the data you've already got through your ticketing systems. So you may have the number of car park passes that you sell. You may have the number of coach packages that you sell. What you need to do is look at those ticketing numbers, and then you can also see if you can match them with postcode data that you have for those tickets. So you can really start to see both the vehicle types, but also the distances those vehicles are travelling. And then you can plug that information into Ecolibrium's tools to get the emissions data for those audience journeys. You could also look at point of sale, having a carbon calculator there. I've shown you a little screen snippet of how Just So Festival use the ticket sellers who've built an Ecolibrium carbon calculator for their clients, and you have that at the point of ticket sale. So when buying a ticket, an audience member can tell you how they're travelling to your festival and where they're coming from, which enables you to calculate both the emissions and the mileage. And you can also make it mandatory for that to be filled in. In terms of Ecolibrium, we then offer the option to carbon balance that journey, but more of that later. So you could also be surveying your audience to get the travel data from them, either sending out online surveys before or after the event, as well as conducting surveys on site. You could also use teams of volunteers to do on-site vehicle surveys. Really what you're aiming for is to get that full picture of understanding how your audience is travelling to the event, where they're coming from, and then turning that into something that's meaningful in terms of looking at your carbon footprint. But what's also really important, in addition to the audience travel data, is to be thinking about all of the other travel associated with your event. So on the next slide, you'll see I've listed staff and crew travel, suppliers, artists, and an on-site vehicle audit. So Ecolibrium has got a company travel log tool. It's a really simple spreadsheet that you can use to collect this data. You can start off by just logging your staff travel, so your production company travel includes site visits as well as live event travel. You can send this out to your key suppliers for them to fill in for their travel, your traders. You could get your artist booking team to be completing it when they're booking artists to get that information. When you're doing it with artists, you'll have to understand if they're travelling from event to event and not double count some of those journeys. So only a portion of the ones that are directly to your event and not others in your artist log. And then we've got an on-site vehicle audit. So look at the mileage of the vehicles that you're using on site before and after the event, and log what vehicle types and fuel types are there. So by gathering all this information and then using the Ecolibrium tools, you can get all of that data for the travel. And so you're really building up that big picture of all the travel associated with your event. And then we can also turn that into an emissions figure. But what do you do once you've got that information, you've measured all of that? Well, the idea is to then look at how you can reduce the travel emissions. So here at Ecolibrium, we've produced a guide for sustainable travel for festival organisers. It's free to download from our website, and in it you'll find there's a 10-point action plan, which has got really simple measures that you can start to implement to look at reducing those emissions. There are things like getting more people car sharing, reducing the number of cars that you have parked at your event, limiting campervan tickets, incentivising people to take public transport package tickets, getting more people on direct coaches, supporting people who arrive by electric car or by bicycle, employing more local traders, caterers and suppliers so that they're reducing the travel that they're doing to your event. So once you've started to implement those changes, what you then need to do is continue with the measuring and going back and year on year, still analysing all of the travel data so you can really understand what measures are working effectively and starting to see how you are getting that emissions figure down. I just wanted to highlight a few case studies of how people have implemented successful measures to reduce the emissions at their festivals. All of these can be seen on the Ecolibrium website, so that's ecolibrium.earth, where we've got an inspiration page where we've pulled together lots of case studies. So just to touch on Cambridge Folk Festival, they reduced travel emissions from traders and caterers by 30%, which is equivalent of 2 tonnes of carbon dioxide, by simply selecting suppliers that were more local to their event. Boomtown offered a car sharing incentive, allowing people to arrive a day early if they were to car share. And they followed this up with a survey on site to assess the effectiveness of it. So they could really analyse and see, did it succeed in getting more people in the cars? And the answer was it did. So it's great to see. Next up, I've shown you the Ticket Sellers and Just So Festival, how they've been working together. So the Ticket Sellers, as I mentioned before, provide a carbon calculator, or the Ecolibrium carbon calculator, at the point of ticket sale. So ticket buyers input their details, but then they're given the option to carbon balance their journeys with a donation. This donation is then, Ecolibrium is able to invest it 100% of the donation in renewable energy projects. One of the big projects that we've been supporting in recent years with these carbon balancing donations from festival goers is getting solar panels on the roofs of schools across the UK. So we've been really effective with those donations to help drive low carbon infrastructure in places that need it most. Next up, I just wanted to touch on the Ecolibrium app. It's a new tool that we've launched recently, and it's a free app, and I think it's got lots of uses, but primarily people within the industry, freelancers, traders, artists, can use it to analyse the different travel journeys they might be making, to look at the carbon emissions resulting from that, to log and record them really easily in the app, and then go on to balance them with investment donations that go either towards our Trees Plus programme or Energy Revolution. So it's just a really simple and effective way that we can get lots of people tackling their own travel and taking responsibility for it. And I'm just going to finish by reminding you that Ecolibrium has produced a sustainable travel guide for events and festival organisers. It's free to download and it's on our website, ecolibrium.earth. It covers all the things that I've mentioned in this presentation. It's also free for festivals to join Ecolibrium as a member, and we're able to support you in starting to measure your travel impacts. And finally, just to say, please think about taking this moment to see how you can start to measure all of those travel impacts relating to your event. Start to do the planning of how we can build back better and greener. And so I'm just going to finish by saying thanks for listening and good luck with those travel action plans.
Hi, my name's Tim Benson and I'm Chair and Project Lead of Powerful Thinking, the Outdoor Events Sustainable Energy Working Group. I'm also Technical Director at ZAP Concepts, which is a live event international energy consultancy, the ZAP standing for Zero Air Pollution. Today we're going to look at what power data we should be recording, why we need this, and some strategies we can employ to gather it. First of all, why do we need to go on this data fact-finding hunt? Why do we need this information? Well, it's because we are using an estimated 380 million litres of diesel annually at events. That's producing an estimated 1.2 million tonnes of CO2e emissions. That's equal to the annual emissions of Malta. And further information on this can be found in a fact sheet that ZAP Concepts co-produced with Hope Solutions, which we will send to the AFO to share with you. So it's crucial that we address our diesel usage if we're going to reduce our on-site emissions. So what kind of data do we need? What kind of data is going to help us? Well, during the planning stage of the event, we need power advancing data. That's getting information from all of our site suppliers and contractors on all the fixtures and fittings and equipment and appliances that they're bringing in, how much energy each of those will draw, what their peak consumption is, and this allows us to then specify the generators we need. During the live phase of the show, we need to monitor how our generators are performing. This performance data then feeds into our post-event reporting, and it helps us with setting targets for fuel and emissions reductions for future editions of the festival. So let's start with the planning stage. It's no longer really good enough just to plan for power based on peak power requirements, because there'd end up being a huge mismatch between generator capacities and actual demand. Where generators are running, say, under 55% of their total generation capacity, their emissions levels are at their highest. And the energy generation relative to the fuel consumption is at its lowest ratio. That means your generators are performing inefficiently and you're getting the least bang for your buck. So in the advancing stages, in the planning stages of your festival, what's needed is a system that factors in the energy consumption behaviour of all your on-site electrical consumers. So we need to address things or factors such as diversity and simultaneity to get a more accurate picture of your site-wide demands. Diversity deals with the fact that appliances don't always constantly draw their full rated power consumption. And simultaneity refers to the intermittent usage of equipment, i.e. not every fixture on the stage is energised at exactly the same time. So power advancing data based on peak power consumption alone is hypothetical and not a realistic measure of your actual power requirements. Now, of course, this is difficult to do if you're not a power expert. So ZAP Concepts has developed their Smart Power Plan tool, which does all these calculations for you, and then provides a site power blueprint for you to share and discuss with your power contractor, with recommendations for generator sizing, for putting in renewable energy sources, battery systems, etc. The tool allows suppliers to draw from a database of fixtures to speed up the advancing submission process. And where specialist or bespoke items are being used, these details can be entered into the system manually. Now, next up, we need to consider how to access basic generator performance data so you can start benchmarking your performance and make comparisons with other events of a similar size. I'd say as a minimum standard, you should be recording on a daily basis, and generator by generator basis, run times, fuel consumption, kilowatt hours generated, that's how much energy the generator is actually producing, and then load spot check readings. All of this data can easily be found on the control panel of your generators. So ask your power contractor to show you how to scroll through the menus and access that information. Now, if you're looking for a detailed analysis, then you need to employ more complex monitoring systems that provide load trending graphs so you can look for patterns in energy usage. Armed with this kind of data, you can start exploring opportunities for putting green batteries into your energy mix, perhaps for overnight baseload management, or to bolster an existing supply, so you don't have to rely solely on upsizing your generators. Common off-the-shelf telemetry systems include Deep Sea Electronics Gateway and JCB's LiveLink, but other power contractors have developed their own proprietary systems. So ask your contractor what they can offer you. Worst case scenario, you could always get the basic data from the generator control panels. Now, if you want to dig even deeper into exactly how the power is being used by specific site applications, for example, what each food trader is drawing, or what a stage lighting rig is pulling, then you need to monitor at a distribution level too. IDE Systems have developed something called the Erica monitoring hardware system. And this measures how much energy is being consumed by all the individual circuits coming off a distribution box. So to summarise, accurate power advancing data is crucial in the planning stages to ensure generators are correctly sized for the expected load. Correctly sized generators will run efficiently, which will make you fuel savings and reduce your on-site emissions. Fuel data, runtime hours, and energy produced are essential metrics for evaluating generator performance, and it's crucial that you record this for each generator on site. Specific data on energy consumption in kilowatt hours is needed when you're going to consider using batteries or other renewable energy sources such as hydrogen or solar. And finally, monitoring at a distribution level will help you create new billing models for food concessions, market traders, etc., where each trader's individual circuit is being monitored. You can charge them per kilowatt hour usage. And this will help incentivize them to reduce their energy consumption because there's a financial attraction to it. Thanks for your time, and I will see you all in the Q&A later on. Bye-bye.
Great, thank you to Tim, Chiara, Mary, and Abi for their contributions. I'm now going to invite some of today's panelists live for the Q&A. So I see that some questions have already been coming in, so thanks to those of you in the audience. And yeah, a huge thanks to everyone for their very clear and relevant presentations. I was just reflecting that even though I've been in the game for sort of 10 years and lived and breathed sustainability, actually there's some really useful insight there for me about what we're doing. So hugely useful, and thank you for taking the time. Just waiting for Abi, but while we are waiting for Abi, I'll kick off because we've just got 15 minutes for questions. And I'm going to leave the top questions because they're travel, and Abi can address those. So question from Sarah Rhodes. As a supplier, am I best only working with events or brands with a similar ethos? We have a good waste and carbon offset. Or should I try and influence ones that aren't trying? It hurts my head. So maybe Tim as a supplier and Mary as a festival organizer, maybe if you could both give us a perspective on that.
Absolutely.
After you, Mary.
Thanks, Tim. I would say you need to do both. So I think it's really important when suppliers are taking bold steps, bringing in new products, pushing boundaries, to recognise that and to encourage them and to buy products from them, to work with them. But it's also really important to take your existing suppliers on a journey, and you can have a lot of influence that way, because ultimately if we all just try and hire the same kit from a small number of suppliers and everybody else is left doing things the old way, we can't get the stuff that we need. We're not actually enabling the industry to grow and provide the services that we need. But at the same point, I would say, if you do make the switch from a supplier who's not willing to take the journey, you need to tell them why, and you need to be really clear about that. And so a good example I would use is that we had been trying for a long time to find a plastic-free wristband for our festival, because they all just get thrown away in hundreds of thousands every year in the UK. And we were told that they didn't exist. And we hunted and we hunted, and we actually found a company that could make us some really great ones. And so we went back to the original supplier and said, look, these guys, they're not British, they're making these, are you interested in these as a product? And they said, nobody, they won't work. So we said, well, they do, so we're going to use them. And actually now that's started to change what wristband suppliers in the UK are looking at and what they're looking at producing, because they've realised that there is a demand for a product. We've used it, we've proved the product works. So talk to everybody that you're working with and just be really upfront and say, we want to stay with you, but these goals are important to us. And if you're not prepared to come on the journey with us, then we may well have to go somewhere else.
Great, thank you, Mary. That's really good advice. From your perspective, Tim, as a supplier, what would your thoughts be?
Well, with power, there's a certain level of kind of like risk taking involved. You have to be willing to take an area of the festival site and say, look, we're going to attempt to do this. We suggest that you tell your other suppliers in that area that they have a kind of like a power budget. There's a limited amount of kilowatt hours they're allowed to use. So we need to have buy-in from all of the production team across that festival site. So if they're already engaged with sustainability, that's a lot simpler from our point of view. We, as Mary said, I think it's all about a journey. And we have to be part of that journey, but at the same time we're also kind of leading on that journey with organisers, because we may be asking them to move slightly out of their comfort zone and do things differently. I've had experience on a festival in Ireland before, where we had a production manager for the second stage there who really wasn't on board and was not particularly kind of happy about some of the things that we were trying to do. By the end of the festival, it was fine, but the initial kind of engagement was, do I really want to do this? Do I want to potentially jeopardise my second stage here? So it's all about the communication in the early part of the planning stages, the advancing stages, actually explaining, look, there is a small risk here. This is what we're going to do to mitigate the risk, but we're doing this because our target is X, and that ties in with your overall sustainability goals of the festival, which are Y. So I think it's easier for us to work with organisers already engaged, but at the same time, I think there's a certain duty, particularly with power contractors, to actually lead on this, because there's a lot of technical detail that people won't understand. And I hear time and time again people saying, well, you've got to give them what they ask for. That's not actually quite the case. You've got to give them what they ask for within reason, but then you've also got to make those asks realistic.
Great, thanks, Tim. And one of my reflections has been from experience that sometimes when we take those risks, it's good to, as you say, make them clear on both sides, but also perhaps put in place a clear North Star in terms of this is our strategy over year 1, 2, and 3. This is the direction of travel that we want to go in, but provide the supplier with the security of a 3-year contract. So I'll welcome Abi. Okay, so a question which I think would be good for you, Chiara. There seem to be a lot of different industry-related organisations working on sustainability. Is there a plan for these to work together or pool resources to present one unified body? Oh, you're on mute, Chiara. That's okay. I'll come back to you in a moment,
Can you
Chiara.
hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Great. How strange. It was working earlier. Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And in a lot of ways, it's what we have been working on for many years, first through powerful thinking, bringing together both power suppliers and festival organisers around one joint table in terms of sharing expertise and resources and providing that unified expertise. And now also through Vision 2025, where just on that steering group, we have representation from across the sector, across the Association of Independent Festivals, Association of Festival Organisers, also ZAP Concerts, Production Service Association, Festival Republic, National Outdoor Event Association, Without Walls. So really trying to bring everyone together around a table so that we can help all of you as event organisers navigate sort of the information that's out there and the different suppliers that are out there and kind of keep on top of everything that's going on.
And I guess we also do need a number of specialist organisations. So whilst we can come together, as you say, around a steering group to reflect as an industry for ourselves on where we need to get to and the journey to get there, we do need a whole range of specialist organisations and suppliers like Smart Power and Ecolibrium with us today, like a Greener Festival and many others that are emerging, because we're going to need those solutions to achieve all the changes we need to make. Okay, so I'm going to move on to travel. Welcome again, Abi. The top question of the day is from Amy Bertout from Shrewsbury Folk Festival. And her question is, in terms of impact of travel, particularly air travel, our biggest cause of this is bringing artists from overseas. What do you feel is the best way of dealing with this impact?
Cool. So this is interesting because what hopefully would happen is once you start measuring travel and measuring audience travel and artist travel, what you'll actually see is compared to audience travel, artist travel is actually minimal, even though you might have flights involved. Because of the scale of the audiences, it isn't as significant as perhaps you might think. That said, is something you want to address. And so there are things that you can do. The things with artists is that it's high profile, it's out there, it's visible, the artists have profile, and it's on your radar. But there are small things you can do. So we can be looking, and this is something that artists and management need to be thinking about when they're planning tours, is looking at their tour planning. How can they geographically be doing an area at any one time? And festival bookers also need to be thinking about that, where people are coming from, looking at local suppliers. That's not to say you're not going to book international artists, of course you are. But this is a challenging conversation that we need to have. We need to be looking at the journeys they're making. Business class flights account for way more emissions than an economy flight. So once you've got that data, you can be thinking about all this. And then there is the option to do the carbon balancing as well, which you could use to show your audience, to show an example that you're addressing artist travel, you're carbon balancing anything unavoidable, and you're setting a great example, hopefully inspiring your audience to follow suit, showing that you're doing it for the artists, bring the audience along with you and tackle the bigger section of the audience travel.
Great, thanks. Chiara?
Just to add to that as well, and I'm sure not everyone is sort of deeply embroiled in this, but as a sector and as an industry at all levels, I think we need to challenge exclusion zones where they exist, because at the moment that is one of the big causes for why more logical routing sometimes isn't possible, especially when we're bringing in artists from overseas. And I guess in terms of sort of risk management, it is being aware that
especially at the moment, there is some conversations about, you know, how do we tax air travel more fairly, both within the UK. There's also some talk about that in Europe. So the risk is over time that the cost of air travel is going to go up, and it might just be that we will have to adjust some of our booking behavior in response to those costs shooting up in terms of flying in artists from far away. And hopefully, at least within Europe, you know, that might bring more train travel also within budget range. But it might also be that for your own booking process, you already set a policy that if you're bringing in artists from certain locations in Europe, that flights aren't even an option because that train journey takes under a certain amount of time.
Thank you, Chiara. It made me think that the Climate Live event, which has been launched by Francis Fox and the Fridays for Future movement, which is our young people standing up with a voice, have a policy of no fly for their UK gigs. So that's a kind of a clear stance on that. But I also hear what you're both saying in terms of that's not an option for many events. And I'm speaking personally, and echoing what Abi was saying, I'm not personally an advocate for not flying, in the sense that we need some time to change our practices, and like Abi was saying, the percentage for a typical event of emissions due to artist flights is potentially quite small compared to audience, and we need these celebrations. You know, we need to bring people together. We need to feel good, feel inspired, dance, sing. And so I know it's sometimes sort of quite a controversial stance, but like Abi, I feel like we need to concentrate on the big things first, and it's almost an inconvenience that artists are so high profile. But it is what it is, and we need to tackle everything. And I think it's a really good example of how it highlights that so many parts of our sort of quite diverse ecosystem as a music industry need to make changes. And I know from a festival organizer perspective that often some of the changes that I need from maybe parts of the supply chain or other partners in our industry to make changes are not there, and I simply have to wait. In the same way that, you know, we sometimes have to wait for advances in technology. So thank you for that. Moving on to the next question, again on travel, regarding travel and people moving to electric cars, which have limited travel distance. Are any events providing charging stations for electric cars for everyone whilst they are at the event or festival? Well, I'll pick up on this one first. We did at Shambhala, and I believe Mary could speak to this as well. In fact, I'll hand over to you, Mary.
I suspect, Chris, you may have had slightly more electric cars at Shambhala than we did, but we'll find out in a moment. We did do this, but it is going to be a challenge rolling forwards, definitely, I think, as the number of electric cars increase. We were probably looking at maybe 15 in 2019. It would probably be more by this year. Yeah, so we were clear with our audience members who contacted us that we would have limited charging available, but that it would be done on a rolling basis. So you couldn't, for instance, just rock up at, I don't know, 2 o'clock on the Saturday and say, I want to charge my car right now, and it will be done in, you know, 3 hours time. That you needed to come at the beginning of the weekend period, and we'd give you within a sort of, I don't know, 24-hour window or something, your car would be charged within that point. But drawing the power to do that takes time and thought and consideration, and trying to match it with when you've got other low periods. So if you can charge a lot of cars overnight, for instance, can be a really helpful way of doing it. So it's that kind of thinking. But for us as well, we also made sure we made everyone very aware of where the existing infrastructure places were in the neighbouring towns. So suggested, you know, okay, well, when you're coming to the festival site, there's these places that are maybe 40 minutes drive away from our site. They're going to be on your journey, so they're a service station. Maybe stop there and have a coffee and kind of get a bulk of your charging done. So actually what you're doing at our site is a small amount of power that we're drawing, because we are Greenfield. We don't have oodles of mains power that we can be drawing into to recharge your car.
Yeah, I'm going to come to you in a moment, Tim, but just before I do, Abi, have you got any perspective on this at UK festivals?
Yeah, so we did have a supplier in this area providing temporary electric charging for the festival industries, but I believe they're not around anymore. So it's sort of knowing that it's something that festival organisers want, a space they want to move into and a demand that's there. It's something that I think we'll see grow and we'll see more suppliers emerge. So at Equilibrium, we've had contact from people wanting to move into this area in terms of supply. So I would say sign up to our newsletter on the Equilibrium website, because we intend to keep people in touch about this with the latest news, because it's something we're watching closely as the demand grows.
Great. And Tim, with your innovative power hat on, how do you see the future, and are there any challenges with this?
Well, here's the problem. You've got a load of lovely electric vehicles piling onto a festival site, parked up next to a diesel generator. The diesel generator is running for 48 hours. It's releasing 2.67 kilograms of CO2e per litre of fuel it's burnt. You're undoing virtually all of the green credentials of travelling by an electric vehicle. That's the main problem. The second problem is the 7 or so cars that Mary was talking about. That's 50,000 kilowatts to charge those, depending on what kind of charging protocol you're using. So there's a couple of things really. It's what's the source of your on-site EV charging, that needs to be considered. As Mary said, it's the volume of vehicles that are going to go through that, and how you actually organise that from a logistical point of view. My preference is to see mains connections used with large-scale battery systems put in line with the mains connection, because as we know, almost 50% of the UK mains power is now from renewables or low carbon sources. So the battery system bolsters the supply. It allows you to charge multiple electric vehicles at once. There's a chap, I think, here at the conference today called Dave Newman from IDE Systems, which is a distribution company. They've developed some electric vehicle charging points that will actually auto start the generator when you plug in. So the generator is not just sitting there running. I think another good thing to think about is to look at those, if you do have to use generators, is to look at the generators on site that do have to run 24/7, that have spare capacity on them during the evening times, because we don't want those hoofing great stage sets or catering sets idling overnight, because that's when the emissions levels are at their highest. Let's utilise that base load and use that to charge cars overnight. And just a point of interest, there's some fairly interesting projects being developed by Siemens and Geopura at the moment to use hydrogen for electric vehicle charging. But before everyone gets carried away with hydrogen, please don't be blinded by the science. It's actually not that green. We worked out the conversion rates for hydrogen electricity to AC power versus solar. And the conversion for hydrogen to AC after all the processes it's gone through is only 18% efficient, whereas solar is more in the region of 80%. So if you want some advice on that, please come to us at Powerful Thinking, because we've got oodles and oodles of information on it.
Great, thank you, Tim. So I think we are, to summarise that, it would be best if electric car users can use National Grid, but there might be opportunities for us in the short to medium term as festivals to provide a limited service, perhaps as an emergency backup, or to use a small number of targeted cars, maybe some crew, or a small number of public that have booked in to use excess power, or if we're able to use renewable power on site. Would that be a fair assessment? Okay, we have 2 minutes, folks. I just want to do a very quick question, and I've got a few closing remarks. Open to everyone. Choosing local suppliers can impact levels of supplier quality. How do we address this problem? From Adrian Cromack. Would somebody like to speak to that?
Yes, it can, but if you do your research where you'll normally find that wherever you're doing your event, there are always some good local suppliers. They might not be the ones that initially approach you because they might not have heard of you. You'll probably, for instance, get Mr. Burger and Chips Man emailing you within 10 seconds of knowing about your event. It doesn't mean the good suppliers aren't out there. And also remember that if you're working with suppliers who are moving from event to event to event, actually it might be that they might not be based where your event is, but they might still only be travelling a really short distance to come to you because they're at an event just down the road the weekend before. So you don't have to just use people from your locality to get short travel distances.
Great. Thank you, Mary. And thank you everyone for your time today and your useful insights. A few closing remarks. We are facing nothing less than an irreversible climate and ecological catastrophe. I can't let this opportunity go by without stating those words because it feels so important. In the words of Greta Thunberg, our house is on fire. And I would judge, and I guess you would, that society is still acting as if it isn't. And I realise that many of us, my organisation included, us at Shambhala, are facing a challenge to our very existence, but please let's treat environment as a fundamental pillar of building back. And I really believe that in a year when all the eyes of the world are on us for COP21, and with this unprecedented pause, we have the opportunity to show real leadership and change the way we do things. And we really need to change the way we do things now. So I realise that's sort of not happy making in a way, but I also hope that there's a sense of inspiration that we do have the ability, we know what we need to do as an industry broadly. We know at least some of the significant changes we can make are available to us and that we could still thrive as businesses and provide the inspiring experiences that we have been doing so for decades. And I want to think that we as the festival sector, we need to be ahead of the curve, and we are genuinely at risk of being behind the curve. There are city councils that are talking about bringing mandatory conditions into licensing of events. And so let's take that step. Let's take this opportunity together, all parts of our industry working together to really think about how we can do things differently and show leadership for the changes that we need. So that's all from us. Thank you for being with us. And next you're in for a treat with the lunchtime music session. Thank you.